Hello and welcome to our Wednesday webinar from the IEA Clean Coal Centre. My name is Benedicta and I'm part of the communications team here. Our monthly webinars are based on our reports, which are available from our website www.iea-coal.org. Residents of member countries and employees of sponsoring organizations can download our reports at no charge after a one-off registration. And I would just say, please type any questions you might have as we go along, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. And the subject for today's webinar is International Collaboration is Key for the Sustainable Use of Coal, presented by Dr. Andrew Minchner. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you today. And I'm basically going to pick up on, as the title says, a lot of the international collaboration activities that we're doing within the centre and showing how they help to move forward, particularly in developing countries, a more sustainable use of coal. This is just the sort of legal stuff that we have to put up. The Clean Coal Centre is part of the network of autonomous collaborative partnerships, and it's focused on a wide range of energy technologies that are known as technology collaboration programs. Now, we're organised in this regard under the auspices of the International Energy Agency, but I should stress that we are functionally and legally autonomous. More importantly, we are funded by national governments who are contracting parties and by corporate industrial organisations who are sponsors. And their role, besides providing the finance to allow this work to continue, is to work with us to establish a meaningful strategic agenda and to help us develop those ideas and strategic thoughts as we go forward year on year. We're dedicated in particular to providing independent information and analysis on how coal can become a cleaner source of energy compatible with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In terms of my presentation, I'm going to say a few words about how our activities support the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, very briefly mention the challenges and opportunities for coal use worldwide, and then I'm going to focus in on the need to address efficiency and environmental issues in a carbon-constrained world, give some examples, importance then of the technology interplay for sustainable power generation. But then the great bulk of my presentation after these introductory remarks will be looking at the collaborations that we've undertaken with various stakeholders with regard to the issues that I've just touched on. This is the Sustainable Development Goals that are relevant to coal production, transport and utilisation. And there's 8 of those that are listed at the bottom of the slide. Now, within that regard, our operating environment allows us to identify and publicise the best practice in every aspect of the coal chain, particularly with regard to the rationale for balancing security of supply, affordability and environmental issues. And that allows us then to counter any unwanted impacts to ensure the well-being of societies worldwide. Within the programme itself, we particularly consider policy and regulatory issues, as well as efficiency gains, lowering greenhouse and non-greenhouse gas emissions, reducing water stress, financial resourcing, market issues, technology development and deployment, and of course looking at how these activities can also ensure poverty alleviation in developing regions through universal access to robust and reliable electricity, alongside the need to look at the social license to operate. I've used this slide before, but I think it's always worth repeating this. I think it's important that we all recognise that the world, from an energy perspective, is a very heterogeneous place. Different parts of the world have access to different energy sources to a greater or lesser degree. We're varied depending again on the geographical locations, and that energy availability to a particular part of the world has a significant impact on the level of industrial development that is ongoing. So different energy options are at various stages of industrial development. And therefore, I would suggest it's not surprising that different regions of the world have different priorities for ensuring a sustainable future, given that they are at different points on the industrial development cycle. Coal use. Coal provides a means to lift populations out of poverty, and it ensures robust, reliable energy sources for power, industry and chemicals production. And that takes forward the industrialization, particularly in developing countries that I've just referred to. And that's a very powerful and key driver for coal use. But of course, at the same time, if coal is going to be part of the globe, continue to be part of the global energy mix, must be able to limit conventional pollutant emissions, and there is state-of-the-art technology out there to do that. And we also need to minimize CO2 emissions, and that can be done through improvements in efficiency and the subsequent introduction of carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture utilization and storage. We've taken the first of those, which was coal power plant efficiency. This is showing very simplistically the CO2 emissions you would get for every kilowatt hour of power you produce in a coal power plant, and it's showing it as a function of different steam temperatures and pressures. The lowest grade, the oldest grade, really the old-fashioned grade, is the subcritical systems, where you have particularly modest steam temperature and pressures. Then maybe 15 years or so ago, there was a steady increase in the introduction of supercritical systems, rather higher pressures and temperatures. And then over the last decade, ultra supercritical steam and temperature and pressure conditions. And you can see as you go towards the higher conditions, you end up with lower carbon emissions per unit of output. And it's not finished yet, as I've indicated on the right-hand side. There's still advanced work going on. Some of that is pushing to take the steam temperature and pressures still further. And then you're looking at a trade-off that the materials you will need could be particularly expensive. But there's also a lot of very interesting work, much of it in China, which is looking at different design options in terms of better integration and optimization of the different subsystems in a power plant, as well as some very novel approaches for making best use of the steam rather than just putting it once through a steam turbine. Moving on to air quality, the emissions from a coal plant are primarily dust, SO2 and NOx, and mercury, in relatively very small proportions in the last one. There are state-of-the-art systems available that will allow you to capture those three primary emissions, dust, SO2 and NOx. And if you capture them in the sort of systems I'm showing on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll take out nearly all the mercury emissions as well. So this is showing the back end of a coal power plant. The first system that will be put in line is the DNOT system, which is usually a selective catalytic reduction unit, and that can reduce the NOx to very low levels. The next system is an electrostatic precipitator. That will take out the fine dust, carbonaceous dust from the system. Then beyond that, you've got a flue gas desulfurization unit, usually a wet-based one, which will take out the SO2. I've included some real-time numbers from a power plant that we have a lot of contact with, which is the CHOW number 3 power plant in China. And you can see here that they've can get down on their plants with these type of systems, plus other interesting approaches to operations, down to very low levels of dust, SO2 and NOx. To put the last number in context, the NOx that you can achieve on a coal power plant with these types of control systems is lower than what you can get on a state-of-the-art natural gas-fired power plant at present. And it's not over yet. As I've shown on the right-hand side, there's a lot of work going on to better integrate these individual systems to make them more efficient and lower the capital costs. Next topic I'm going to touch on is technology interplay. Having talked about emissions and efficiency, it's not just about reducing coal use and lowering emissions. coal can well have a critical role to play as variable renewable energy capacities increase on the power grids. And I'm going to say a bit about that now. This is a slide provided by McDowell and his colleagues at Imperial College. And this is showing two pictures. The top one is showing a power grid system that's based on variable renewable energies, that's wind or solar, linked in with some form of storage. What that's actually showing you is that if you're dependent on just wind and solar, you take the power when you get it, but when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine enough, you're limited in what you can do. But you can get around that if you've got some form of dispatchable power generation available to you, which provides demand on request quickly and efficiently according to operational needs. Coal power or gas power are both proven options that can achieve this, as can biomass and hydro. And when you integrate the grid system to ensure an interplay of, say, coal or gas with variable renewable energy sources, the dispatchable power source can be readily adjusted to balance the grid. And it's this interplay of dispatchable power with variable renewable energy that provides the necessary inertia to avoid the outages. Equally important, such systems can always meet the demand. Now, people, of course, will say, oh, well, of course, that's fine, but you know, variable renewable energy is lower cost, it's becoming ever lower cost, it's a very good system. And that's true, and that's why there's a lot of it being applied. But there's a limit, probably, to how much of that you would want on a system. For two reasons. One, because of the instability issue, but also the cost will rise as the capacity of variable renewable energy increases on your grid. And once it gets past 50% capacity, it rises very sharply indeed. But if you can include, say, a coal power plant with CCS, you can not just achieve the flexibility you need, but you can also ensure very low CO2 emissions because they're taken out by the CCS unit while maintaining adequate flexibility. So I appreciate it's a rather detailed slide. I guess the key messages of this that variable renewable energy alone can be unstable and will not necessarily meet full demand requirements, but it's the interplay with dispatchable power, the grid can be balanced and outages can be avoided. Having said that, this tells you where the state of the art is at present on CCS, and it's fair to say, or CCUS, and it's fair to say it's still got some way to go. This is showing that there's 19 operational facilities, and they between them can store about 38 million tons of CO2 a year. Sounds a lot, but it's not when you consider the global power fleet. There's 4 more in construction that should be completed this year, 10 in advanced design using the front-end engineering design approach, and 18 in earlier stages of development. This slide also shows where these units are, both those in operation or construction or under development. I think it's fair to say you can see that the key regions are North America, some parts of Europe, a little bit in the Middle East, and the Asia Pacific region, parts of the Asia Pacific region. So that sort of allows you to get a feeling for where this can be applied. But what I think is very important is that we need to ensure that there's cooperation so that this essentially what is an OECD technology can be adapted to meet the needs of developing countries and allow them to take forward coal-based power plants with relatively low or very low carbon emissions, because they're the people that are going to most use coal for the foreseeable future of the next few years. So moving on from that to the cooperation aspect, which, as I indicated, is the majority of the presentation, we're working closely with many organisations and we're trying to facilitate cleaner, more effective advanced coal technology deployment, particularly in developing countries for the reasons I've just touched on. Excuse me. The first study I want to refer to is a successful study that we've recently completed for Indian stakeholders with the support of the IEA's Coal Industry Advisory Board. And the idea behind this project was to determine a pathway for reducing CO2 and other emissions, such as SOx, NOx, and particulates, from the coal power sector in India, with a timeline out to 2040. And I've listed down there, there's a lot of activities that can be considered. Policies are clearly an important area which you need to get those right to ensure that you can get to where you need to be. Increasing efficiency and flexibility, as I've touched on already for the coal power fleet, is very important. Improving air quality with robust standards and control technologies is critical. CCS is one for a little bit for the future in India, but it's important that they can start building up their knowledge and capacity of this so that it can be introduced at a later date. And we've done a lot of modelling, and that's led to the development of an overall pathway for accelerating the uptake of high efficiency, low emissions coal power plant and ensuring that it's compliant with stricter environmental norms. And from that, we've identified a policy-driven route for subsequent CCS and CCUS introduction. Of course, it isn't just about us. The whole point of this project is to work with local stakeholders and other international bodies. And this next slide lists the stakeholder engagement which we've established on that project. You can see here we have senior figures from the Electricity Authority. We have representatives from the Ministry of Power and Coal in India, from also the Department of Science and Technology. We have a lot of technology suppliers and users, and we have a number of institutes and other bodies that we collaborated very closely with. And I think it's been a very key project. These are the key messages that we need to be aware of. India is going to continue to include coal within its energy mix. And this point was made actually very eloquently by the Director General of the International Energy Agency last week, who pointed out that India has a lot of new coal plants. Yes, it's introducing a lot of variable renewable energy, but at the same time, it's going to be using these plants for a number of times as it transitions to a different energy mix at some point in the future. So India is going to continue to include coal, and it's going to be reducing its emissions of CO2, it's going to be improving its air quality, and it's going to benefit from finding commercial outlets for byproducts of using coal, particularly things such as utilising the ash. There's a series of actions that they need to take. I'm not going to go through those at the moment in the interest of time, but they're consistent with what I've just put up in the previous slide. If you require any further information on this project, the report has just been issued, and I believe you can download it from our website. And if you want any further information beyond that, I can offer it, or as many of my colleagues, and I should note that the project lead on this case was Debo Adams. I'm sure she'll be delighted to talk to any of you about the project. I'm now going to move on to a program of work that we've been undertaking for a little while now with support from the US Department of State. And this is a capacity building program in Southeast Asia, where we're looking to reduce mercury and other pollutant emissions from the coal combustion sector. The capacity building with the Indonesian coal power sector is designed to identify sustainable strategies for mercury monitoring, evaluation and reduction. Alongside that, we have a little bit bigger program of capacity building with the Indian coal power sector, which covers all conventional emissions, control requirements, plus efficient, flexible operation, recognizing that such reduction strategies can provide the associated means to limit mercury emissions. What's very important about this is it's not that we're just doing work on one plant with one organization. It's a very comprehensive program working with a number of end users in India and Indonesia, working with the policymakers as well, and with the environmental sector as well in both cases. The idea behind this is to provide long-term and sustainable benefits for the coal power sector in both Indonesia and India. The point being that we will not just be training and working with the organizations, the two countries, we'll be training the trainers, so there will be scope to be that this work can be used by other emerging economies in due course. Just a bit more on the Indonesia project outline, and I should at this point stress that the project leader for this is my colleague, Dr. Leslie Sloss, and she will be delighted to talk to anyone about Mercury. So please, you can contact her through our website, or if you have her email, you can contact her directly. The first phase of the Indonesian project, which has been completed successfully, was to evaluate mercury emissions from the coal sector on a plant-by-plant basis. We're talking about 100 plants here. And those plants have then been ranked to identify those with the most potential for cost-effective emissions control. We're now into phase 2, where we're working with utilities, government regulators and vendors to propose potential emission control demonstration projects. And we're just launching the training capacity building and outreach program. In fact, the first virtual workshop in that training series will be taking place in the middle of next week. Unfortunately, it has to be on a virtual basis because of the limitations on travel due to the COVID-19 problems. But hopefully sometime we'll be out of that and then doing face-to-face training, because there's still a lot of it to go on over the next year or so. In the third phase of this work, at the end of all that, we'll produce a catalogue of viable emission reduction projects, and we'll work with the stakeholders to identify potential sources of funding. This slide shows the top 45 of the 100 power plants that we analyse, and it's showing the total mercury emissions that are estimated to be remaining for the lifetime of each unit. And I think the important point to here is you can see that we are only showing the top 45, so the ones from 46 to 100 are going to have even lower levels than we're seeing at the right hand side of that graph. But it's also important to note that the top 15 units here emit approximately 50% of the emissions from the entire fleet. So we are looking at here to establish some form of targeted emissions control, because we think that would be far more cost effective than a blanket best available technology requirement across the whole fleet. And as I said, my colleague Dr. Sloss is working closely with our partners in Indonesia to put this sort of plan together. Moving on to India, we have 3 parts to the program, 3 pillars to this program. The first is looking at continuous emissions monitoring for coal-fired plants. The second is looking at multi-pollutant emission control, and alongside that, looking at ash management opportunities. And the third is looking at coal plant flexibility, all topics that I've sort of been touching on as I've been going through the presentation. Now, for each of these pillars, the Clean Coal Centre and its partners will produce a desk report that will evaluate the issues, create a training program suited to the Indian challenge, and will then deliver training workshops to the Indian stakeholders in four regions within the country. Just picking up a little bit more on the first, India has new emission norms for particulates, SOx, NOx and mercury from coal plants. That's great. And in order to demonstrate compliance and to identify appropriate reduction strategies, Indian plant operators must be able to accurately and consistently measure emissions from all stacks. That's great. Unfortunately, at present, India has no national standards for emissions monitoring, has no national calibration standards, and no training scheme for emissions monitoring. So we're going to try and deal with that in that we intend to work with our Indian stakeholders and our international partners to develop a training scheme for monitoring emissions from the plants. And that training would include workshops, including training the trainers. And from that, we hope to facilitate national capacity building within India that will be delivered within the 4 regions that we've already identified. The second one is 2-pronged. It's dealing with multi-pollutant emissions and ash management. Now, as indicated, the new emission norms are going to require the installation of pollutant control systems on many plants, and this is indicating currently India has little experience with such technologies. And indeed, many of the technologies may not be suitable for India's almost uniquely high ash coals that are used in the power sector. Alongside that, India produces large quantities of coal ash as a waste, and the current approach to ash management doesn't allow for revenue opportunities. They're losing the opportunity to make some money. So going back to the first one, the emission norms, Indian utilities, we believe, and they believe, would benefit from guidance on which technologies will work best in their plant and with their specific goals. And we're going to work on them with that to ensure that decisions made are cost effective. The changes in ash management strategies is interesting. If you go elsewhere in the world, almost the rest of the world looks on coal ash, coal waste, as a commercial product. It's used for low-grade materials like making aggregates or utilizing in cement works, but it can be utilized and doesn't have to be dumped and create environmental problems. So rather than create an environmental problem, which you may have to pay to clean up, you can actually utilize this and sell it to end users like cement works and road makers. And these changes in the ash management strategies at many Indian plants could turn a waste material into an additional source of revenue, which would be very welcome, I'm sure. Finally, on plant flexibility, we've talked about this already. As the proportion of variable renewable energy increases on the grid, coal plants might have to operate with greater flexibility. And we know in India there's going to be a mix of the two for some while to come. And increased plant flexing can lead to higher operating costs and increased risk of plant damage. The solution to that is we are working with the Electric Power Research Institute of the USA. They've developed a flexibility toolkit. So we're working with them to deliver that toolkit training to utility operators that will allow us to arm them with the capacity to operate their plants efficiently and cost effectively under what are going to be challenging conditions. The last project I'm going to just mention briefly is work that's being undertaken by the United Nations Economic Centre for Europe, which is they are being supported by a group of experts for cleaner electricity systems, and I represent the IEA Clean Coal Centre within that group of experts, and they are undertaking a very interesting carbon neutrality programme. Under the terms of the Paris Agreement, the UNECE countries between them have to cut emissions or capture at least 90 gigatons of CO2 by 2050 to meet their 2-degree target. Now, there are a variety of pathways that can be followed to attain that carbon neutrality in the region. And the basis behind this project is to look at and assess those options and model their impact, recognizing that we can be technology agnostic here. We don't have to say follow variable renewable energy on its own. We don't have to follow coal on its own. We can look at a wide range of material mixes of energy sources, and that would include material options such as nuclear, for example. With that in mind, this project has been put together through the UNECE, which, as I said, is being supported by a number of us from outside organisations. And there's basically 3 pillars for policy dialogue. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through this, but it's basically awareness raising and policy dialogue that will allow carbon neutrality to be established in the UNECE region as a whole. The whole system approach is being undertaken here, and we'll be looking both at power, or are looking both at power and energy intensive industries such as cement, coking, for example. Currently, 80% of today's energy mix in the region is fossil based, and even to get to a climate change scenario that meets the 2-degree target, fossil fuels are still going to account for 56% of primary energy by 2050. And indeed, it's because of this dependence on fossil fuels that makes achieving carbon neutrality an absolute imperative. This is the work plan for 2021. We're bringing things together now, and the intention is at September of this year, the project, and more importantly, the outcomes of the project, will be presented at the UN Energy Summit, and then subsequently at other forums. In particular, I want to highlight it will be included in the presentations at COP26 in November of this year. And we believe that by that time there will be a very interesting stories to tell. Anyone who's heard me give a presentation or a webinar before knows I'm going to talk about the knowledge partners. I'm going to again today because I think it's a very important issue. We believe that it's very essential to bring together and facilitate contact between different coal users, coal suppliers, coal and environmental groups, to ensure that we can cooperate at various levels and in various ways. So we established a knowledge partnership with that in mind, and you can find more information about this network at the website address shown here, or you can contact myself, or perhaps more importantly, my colleague Benedict Brox, who spoke to you at the beginning of the presentation. This slide shows the members that we have at present, which is over 100 at this time. And we started doing this work, getting people interested in what we were trying to put together round about January of last year, just before the COVID pandemic started. So all of this has been essentially done on a virtual basis. But we have over 100 members so far. We're seeking further ones. This slide shows a little bit out of date. It was put together a few weeks ago, but it shows at that point we had 102 members. We had these 27 countries that are represented here, and alongside them in brackets you can see the number of organizations in each country that are members of our network. And I think again it's worth stressing that we have 11 developing or industrializing countries within those 27 who've joined up, which we find is a very encouraging thing indeed. In terms of our ongoing activities, we on a regular basis provide a list of our recent and current studies to all our members, one so that they know what we're doing, but also saying, well, look, if this is particularly useful to it and you have data that would be valuable to us, then there's the opportunity for you to provide data to us. Equally, if it's a topic you're particularly keen on and would like to review the draft report before it's published, that would again be a benefit, and we'd be very happy to work with you on that. As I said, our prime purpose is to facilitate the bringing together members with common interests. And we will also provide additional advice to members. And should we get to the point where COVID is no longer quite the disastrous impact that we have at present, we will start running our international events again, and any member can get 10% off the entry price of those events. We have other ideas being formulated, so keep an eye on our weekly newsletter and our website to find out about those. And if you're a member, of course, we'll be letting you know. But clearly we'd like to sort of put together some events, or workshops or whatever that would benefit the members as a whole. So not just in terms of we provide you information, but there could be a bigger sharing and facilitation of that sharing amongst all our members. It's my final slide. Very simplistic, but I think it sums it up. We can all work alone, but it's more effective and actually more fun to cooperate with others. So that's my closing remarks. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it interesting, and as Benedict will tell you shortly, it'll be available on YouTube in the near future. So I will now go to the questions section and see what we've got. Sorry, just bear with me. There's a question there that says Europe ? Which could mean a lot of things. Europe ? I wonder if that's saying Europe's going towards away from coal. Does that mean everyone else should be doing the same? I think essentially what I would say to that is, as I said in my presentation, that different regions will need different approaches. Europe developed its infrastructure and its economy on the back of coal some time ago, and is now taken the view, within the European Union at least, that the future is away from coal, and they're not really going for CCS, though they may for some of the industrial processes that they're not for the power sector. So if they're going that route, fine and good luck to them, but that won't necessarily work, as I said, for other parts of the world. And so that, you know, what suits them will not necessarily suit maybe Eastern Europe or beyond, the STAN countries, for example, which have a less developed economy, less developed infrastructure. So I hope that answers your question. I haven't mentioned here about how do we join the Knowledge Partners Network? Well, if you're particularly interested, please go on our website to have a look at what's there, and that will tell you a lot of information about how to go about it. To join is very easy. You just have to contact myself or Benedict de Brox to indicate you'd like to join, and all we ask is that we can exchange logos with you so that we can include your logo on the listing that I showed a couple of slides before, and then beyond that you're in, and then it's really what everyone makes of it. And the other point I should stress, it doesn't cost anything to join, and it doesn't cost anything to remain a member. So it's free to join, free to maintain your membership, and you get access to a lot of information, including after 6 months of their release, access to our reports. The members who are actually paying for the program get a sort of lead in time before everyone else can get hold of the reports. That would appear to be the questions at the moment. So I guess it's back to you, Benedicte or Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And all that's left for me to say really is the slides from this webinar will be available to download from our webinar page shortly. And the next webinar from us will be on Wednesday, the 14th of April at 12 on hydrogen production from coal. And it will be presented by Greg Kelsall. Thank you all for joining us today, and goodbye.